Hi, so this morning I finished The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides, and I just really wanted to talk about it. So that's why I'm making this video. I'm not really going to do a review. It's mostly just my thoughts and my reading experience mostly. So this is the book in this really nice edition with a lovely photograph. I really like photographs as book covers, as long as it's done well, obviously. And I'd been wanting to read this for years. I think as soon as I got back into reading and discovered Goodreads, I very soon came across this book and wanted to pick it up, but never did because in real life shops they have it only in a weird thriller cover, and I really didn't like it. So I decided to order it, but every time it just did just not make the list of things I was going to order. So a couple of years went by, and I finally picked it up. So I was expecting a story of 5 sisters who committed suicide, and just initially I was expecting reading from their perspective and learning what was going through them, their mental health, and what made them commit suicide. I think just before I bought it, maybe just before I was going to start it, I found out that it was written from the perspective of a group of boys who are quite obsessed with these girls. Now, I initially thought, oh, that's kind of strange, but whatever, it might still be a really good book because, I mean, it's very highly acclaimed. I mean, the excitement was still everywhere, so I just thought, I experienced it for myself. And I found out that it's contrary to a group of boys who's obsessed with these girls and thus try to piece everything together and find out why they committed suicide. It is kind of about that, but it's more about the boys and their whole romanticizing of these girls than actually about the girls' struggles. It actually was quite a weird book as it was written from the perspective of a group of men who were thinking back at to the time they were a group of teenage boys completely obsessed with these Lisbon sisters. You only experience them in the romanticizing of these boys. And even though that was kind of what I expected, very romantic, atmospheric novel, it actually really fell flat at a lot of times because sometimes, which was during the entire book actually, in full length of the full book, nothing happened. And that was quite a letdown because I like the occasional events to occur in the book. I really liked the Lisbon girls still, even though they were just a romanticization by a group of teenage boys. However, you read from the perspective of these boys and never got to know them, and that really bugged me. You knew that there was definitely an unreliable narrator, but you couldn't really pinpoint everything. You didn't even get to know his name. I don't even know if it was narrated by one person or multiple. If it was just the thoughts of an entire group. And that is really strange to read, and I mean, it was still quite cleverly done. Jeffrey Eugenides' writing is excellent, but it was just, at most times, it was very dull. There was a section which was exactly as I had pictured the book initially. He had sensed, this said many years later, of course, when Joe O'Connell claimed to tap at will the energy of his chakras, an ancient pain arising from Mrs. Lisbon, the sum of her people's griefs. She came from a sad race, he said. It wasn't only Cecilia. The sadness had started long before America. The girls had it too. And that just, oh yeah, it gives me chills right now. Because it's so magical. And that was kind of the strange thing, because up until page 180 or something, I thought, oh, It's definitely going to be a 2-star book. But the ending just made everything so magical. And I'm actually thinking that maybe I should have read this a couple of years earlier, because, as I said, I have been wanting to read this for years, and when it initially caught my eye, I was still really into the young adult books. And I remember reading Looking for Alaska and loving it, and rating it 5 stars. And even though I'm not going to change it because I remember how much I loved it, I wouldn't reread it now, because I'm almost certain that I will be severely let down by it, because my reading tastes have changed so much. And this book at some points reminded me of Looking for Alaska, because of the perspective from this boy onto a girl. In this book, there's some so beautiful sentences where I just thought, oh, that's amazing, but most of it just felt really dragged out. And the perspective, as I said, made me really uncomfortable. I felt that the characters all were so flat. That's probably the point, but I didn't like it. It was, you don't really get invested in it. I just thought, oh, I'm going to rate this 2 stars, not a bit higher. And then I read those last 60 pages. From page 180 and onwards till the end, suddenly things started happening. And even though it wasn't a lot, because basically the suicides of 4 out of 5 girls, I think even 3 out of 5 girls, got discussed, which you knew from the beginning, so it wasn't a plot twist or anything of the sort. But it was very magical almost, but fortunately not in a romanticizing of suicide way, because that was kind of what I was afraid of. I had expected it some sort of being really romantic and really tragic, but I was afraid that from that would follow a romanticization of suicide. Even those boys who were really obsessed with the girls, they weren't romanticizing what happened to them either, even though it was told from a sort of romanticized perspective, because they were looking back on it. But it was more romanticization of the time than actually of the suicides. The perspective really brought something into the story, of course, and I can imagine that for some people it's an amazing read, because it's a very extraordinary book, a very interesting perspective. And it really gives something extra to the book. If you had read from one of the sisters, or maybe, sometimes you read from the perspective of one sister, and sometimes from another. How original. Then it would be just like any other mental health book, probably. But this was really very original. I think that the perspective really contributed something, even though I also had problems with it. So it's all really conflicted. But I eventually rated it 3 out of 5 stars instead of 2. And 3 always feels like the average rating for when a book doesn't really do something for you, but you can acknowledge that it is an okay book and some people might like it. But this book really, really touched me, but at the same time I really didn't like it, so it just was the 1 star and the 5 star thing. If I had, for the rest of the book, found it as boring as I initially thought I was finding it, I would never have made a video about it, because it didn't speak to me at all. It wasn't like I hated it with a fiery passion like Valley of the Dolls, for example, even though now I can see why I probably read it in a wrong way. But that's not what I'm talking about today, because I can go on about that for hours. But I really didn't feel any negative or positive passion regarding this book initially, except for the once in a while, a beautiful sentence. And then, as the book progressed further and further, suddenly there were a lot of beautiful sentences, and suddenly there actually were events happening, and they were described beautifully. And I honestly can't stop thinking about this. From the first sentence, you know that all these sisters are committing suicide. When you find out that they have committed suicide, it's just so heart-wrenching, and the scene was just so well crafted, and Eugenides' writing came forward in such an excellent manner. If I think back on it, I think the main thing that bothered me in this book was that I had actually still expected it to be written from the perspective of the girls, or otherwise still be discussing the perspective of the girls, so dealing with their view on their mental health, but that wasn't the case. And I also think that there were too little events in the plot to actually keep it going for me, because it wasn't a type of writing like The Great Gatsby, where every word is just amazing. It was more like the occasional, thoroughly interesting. Well, it wasn't beautiful as much as enchanting, which is really strange to say. But I think his writing really manages to do something. It's just that it doesn't always come forward as well enough in the plots of this book. So this was probably the most rambly thing ever, but I just really felt the need to let this out. And as I said, I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, but it wasn't just okay. Also, what I found very interesting was that after the event of the death of the sisters, which was so well written, it got really boring really fast again. And that was the strange thing in this book, that it was just so boring and then so excellent and then so boring again. So I wouldn't say don't read it, but I wouldn't say read it necessarily either. I hope this made any sense whatsoever. And if not, then it's a real tragedy, isn't it? Bye.